Welcome to Frontier Noir, where the dust doesn't just settle on the land, it settles on secrets. In the town of Redemption, the sun and the church bell were the only two things a man could trust. The sun rose in the east, set in the west, burned like hellfire, and was never late. The church bell was the same. It rang at 6 in the morning, 12 at noon, and 6 in the evening, as steady as a dying man's heartbeat. But this noon, the sound was wrong. It wasn't the cheerful, rolling peal that called the townsfolk to their midday meal. It was a single toll, low, slow, and heavy. A bell that didn't mark the hour. It marked a life, a death knell. Sheriff Elias Thorne felt it in his chest before he heard it with his ears. He sat in his office, the August heat plastering his shirt to his back, and when the solitary sound drifted through the window, he closed his eyes. Silence. The entire town seemed to hold its breath. The blacksmith's hammer stopped. The laughter from the Salty Dog Saloon died. Redemption was listening. It was waiting. Elias didn't have to wait long. A frantic knock rattled his door. It was Father Michael, the church's young priest, his face as white as candle wax. "Sheriff," he stammered, pointing back toward the church. It's the bell tower. There's a man." Elias donned his worn felt hat and stepped outside. The sun was a physical blow. Dust rose with every step he took down the main street. He didn't need to ask for more details. He knew where he was going. At the base of the stone church tower, a small crowd had begun to gather, keeping a respectful, fearful distance. The body lay there, directly beneath the massive bell rope. A stranger, definitely not one of Redemption's own. The man's clothes were too clean, his leather boots, though caked with red mud, too new. He wore a city vest and a pair of finely tailored trousers. He lay on his back, eyes wide open to the unforgiving sky, a small, dried trickle of blood at the corner of his mouth. His neck was broken, a fall from a great height, plain and simple. "Merciful God," Father Michael whispered, making the sign of the cross. He must have climbed up to see the view and slipped. Elias said nothing. He knelt beside the body, his old eyes taking in every detail. He was not a man who believed in simple explanations. In Redemption, simplicity was usually a mask for a much uglier truth. The victim's hands showed no signs of being used to climbing. They were soft, uncalloused, and then Elias saw it. Clutched in the man's right palm was a rock. Not just any pebble, it was a piece of milky quartz, shot through with faint golden veins that shimmered strangely in the sun. "You know this man, Father?" Elias asked, his gaze fixed on the rock. "Never seen him." Father Michael shook his head. "I heard he arrived yesterday. Took a room at the Grand Hotel." "Is that so?" Elias murmured. He gently pried the rock from the victim's cold, stiff fingers. It was heavy and cool. A silent witness. A bad fall. But I have to wonder, what was a city man like him looking for in a bell tower? He stood up, pocketing the stone. "Get these people back to their business, Father Michael. I'll have someone come for the body. It was an accident," he said, loud enough for the curious onlookers to hear. A tragic accident. But in his mind, another word echoed. Murder. At the Grand Hotel, a rickety two-story building that called itself luxurious, the skinny clerk confirmed the victim's name was Silas Kane. He was from some city back east, had paid for a week in advance, and kept to himself. He was curious, though, the clerk said, snapping his gum. "Asked me about old things, town history, and the old silver mine up on Wolf Hill." Elias felt a spark of interest. "The silver mine?" "Yeah. The one that's been boarded up for 20 years after the collapse, told him there was nothing up there but ghosts and rattlesnakes. Back in his office, Elias placed the quartz on his desk. He looked at it, then out the window towards the barren hills that surrounded Redemption. The red mud on Silas Kane's boots, the silver mine on Wolf Hill. A man from the city didn't come all this way for a vacation. He came looking for something, and it seemed he'd found it. Elias strapped on his gun belt. He wasn't going to wait for morning. The dark was a friend to secrets, and he wanted answers before the redemption night could swallow them whole. The ride to the old mine took nearly an hour. The trail was almost gone, reclaimed by weeds and fallen rocks. The air grew thin as he climbed, and the silence up here was different from the silence in town. It was vast, ancient, and threatening. The entrance to the mine was a black maw in the hillside, blocked by a few rotting planks of wood and a sign that read, "Danger, keep out." Elias dismounted. He saw them immediately. Footprints. A new pair of boots, pressed deep into the damp earth near the entrance. They matched the ones Silas Kane wore. He'd been here. Drawing his revolver, a habit born from decades of caution, Elias pulled a board aside and slipped inside. The darkness was cold and damp. The smell of wet earth and decaying timber filled his nostrils. Elias struck a match, the small flame dancing to life, pushing back the gloom just enough for him to see the main tunnel. He moved slowly, the sound of his own footsteps the only thing echoing in the stillness. The wooden support beams looked like they could give way at any moment. Elias didn't go far. He didn't have to. About 20 yards from the entrance, he found what Kane had been looking for. On the rock face, there were fresh marks from a pickaxe. A few chipped stones lay on the tunnel floor, and there, exposed on the surface of the wall, was a shimmering vein of ore. It wasn't silver. It was the same milky quartz, threaded with faint golden lines, identical to the rock in Elias's pocket. Kane hadn't just been asking about the mine. He knew exactly where to look. He came here, took a sample, and in his excitement, he must have gotten careless. Elias held the match up, scanning the tunnel. No sign of a struggle, no second set of footprints. But that didn't mean anything. The killer could have waited outside, waited for Kane to return to town, followed him up the bell tower for some reason, and when they were at the top, only one of them came back down. The match sputtered out, plunging Elias back into darkness. He stood there, in the cold earth, and it all began to fall into place. Silas Kane didn't slip. He was pushed. He was killed not for what he had found, but for what he was about to do with his discovery. This old silver mine wasn't played out. It was just hiding something else. Gold. A fortune of it, disguised in a vein of seemingly worthless quartz. A secret someone in Redemption had been keeping for 20 years. Elias made his way back out, blinking in the daylight. He looked down into the valley, where the town of Redemption lay quiet under the afternoon sun. The rooftops, the church, the dusty street. From a distance, it looked peaceful. But Elias knew better. The monster wasn't in this abandoned mine. The monster lived down there, wearing the clothes of honest citizens, drinking whiskey in the Salty Dog, and maybe, just maybe, looking up at this very hill, wondering if the old sheriff was smart enough to piece it all together. He swung himself onto his horse. The rock in his pocket felt heavier now. It wasn't just evidence anymore. It was a challenge. The bell at noon hadn't tolled for a stranger. It had tolled for the false piece of redemption itself. And Elias Thorne knew that before this was over, that bell would ring again. What terrible secret is the town of Redemption hiding? To find out, subscribe to Frontier Noir and ring the bell so you don't miss the next chapter. The shadows are waiting.